Thanks, everyone. I hope that you've had enough cookies for the afternoon to keep you going. And I know it's getting late in the afternoon and we're all getting tired, so I'll try to keep you edutained. This talk was developed a few months ago, actually, for another conference, and that's why I was ready to step in and substitute in for Jean. Unfortunately, she got sick today. But I'm hoping that you'll learn a lot and have fun at the same time. This is my LinkedIn profile, just show it for 2 seconds. But really what I like to do is I like to grow vegetables. And if any of you, if I'm connected with any of you on Facebook, you'll see that I'm always posting pictures of my vegetables. Does anybody know what this is? Oh, okay, great. Not too many people know what that is. It's a kohlrabi, K-O-R-A-B-I. And it's the first year I tried those, and it turned out pretty well. And this is my tomatoes, and I've got kale. I do a lot of kale. I make smoothies at home. And of course basil for pesto. I make my own pesto. So that's the real me, you know, gardener. I also have some artichokes up there. You can see those purple flowers, artichokes. But the way that I like to run my sessions, I like to run them very interactively, because I feel that, and I know that when you stand there or sit there and just listen to me, 20 minutes later, you're sitting in the back and you're saying, what did he say? If you forget, right? So I like to have you guys interact with me and have it more of a discussion rather than just me talking to you by yourself, right? You're just sitting there like this, right? So you're going to be talking, and hopefully I'll be able to keep you awake at the same time. So, setting some expectations. One, I won't read the slides. You can have them later, right? So, I'm not going to go through point by point, and I don't want you guys to get disappointed. Oh, we didn't cover that. Well, you'll get the slides later. Green, I do a lot of color coding. Green means go. Means it's time to interact. Would like you guys to ask questions, or for me to, interact with you, and you guys can answer questions. And I will promise you today that you'll learn more than just software stuff. So I hope that that's okay with you. So the foundation of this talk was, I read this book. Who's read that book, The 7 Habits? Okay, I know some of us more seasoned people have probably read that. But less seasoned people probably have not. It's a book, a general management book that's quite famous, and actually Stephen Covey, he died recently. I don't know if you guys know that or not, but he died recently. And I went back and reread that book and decided to kind of sharpen my saw, which is one of the last habits, was sharpen your saw, meaning that you want to get better at making your tools sharper. So here are his original 7 habits. Sorry, I'm standing in front of you. Be proactive. Very, very common sense, right? But it's good to go over them and think about them as you go through some of the things that we do in our work and actually in our daily lives as well. Being proactive, thinking about the objective that we're shooting for, thinking about prioritizing, right? Win-win, we've all heard that one. Listening before talking, synergizing, working together, and like what I said, sharpen the saw. So, who knows how long it took to do this bridge? Anybody have any ideas how long it took to do the Golden Gate Bridge? Any guesses?
3 years.
Oh.
No,
Does that tell you?
No, it just says when it opened in 37. I think
it opened at 37, but how long did it take to make it?
I think it took 3 years.
3 years. Anybody else?
It was 11.
11 years. Okay. Anyone else? Actually, it only took, only took 4 years. 4 years. Now, why would it take, you guessed 11. One person guessed 3, but why would you think that it would take a lot less time than what you would normally think? I mean, this is a huge undertaking, right?
Well, partly because of the fact that labor laws were much less. Life was a lot less valued then. Lots of people died making it.
Yeah.
Hey, San Francisco's my hometown, so I'm pretty familiar with it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, the reason is that it's built on standard engineering principles. right? Mechanical engineering, things that are known. But we're making software in which we have a lot of unknowns, right? And that's why it made things so much easier back then to build something as huge as the Golden Gate Bridge, where we're building a little web app, and sometimes it could take us years, right? And so there have been a lot of changes in the way that we work that make us take longer than we should. Failures have caused the way that we're work together, smaller teams. Everybody's heard about this thing Agile, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Changes in technology. Why would changes in technology in business models change the way that we work? Anybody have any idea? Why do business models change the way that we actually develop software? What's that?
We develop software to make money, so it's
right?
business drives the software.
Right, okay, so what's the difference between 10 years ago and you went to Staples and you brought Microsoft Office for $400 and you brought it home and you installed it on your machine? That's part of the difference, yeah, but what's the change in the business model? Right, you're paying every month. You're paying $10 or something like that, right? So what does that mean? That means you're not really committed. You say, oh, okay, I don't like it. I'll just switch to another one, right? And so what does that do in terms of pressures on us as developers and as QA folks? What does that do for the pressure on us to deliver?
Stand out and deliver what somebody wants.
We have to do standard, we have to consistently improve, right? We can't rest on, oh, they already bought it, we'll wait till the next version, 95 or whatever, right? So that really changes the way that we think about things. So I've worked with a lot of clients, and I'm going to go over what I call the 7 habits. And 7 habits are based on, what will drive success and what will prevent failure. Most of these are not, rocket science. They're not really hard. But I'm hoping that you learn something along the way. So first of all, I like to think about how do we prevent failure, right? So what would be the 3 common things, 3 common sources of failure? Let's take a vote. So who votes for number 1 being resistance to change? 1, 2, 3. So we got like 7 or 8. Okay. How about distrust? Anybody vote for distrust? We got a couple. 4. How about requirements churn? Okay, a little bit more. Not about 9 on that one. And how about what I call agile doing and not being? Oh. Okay, we got just as many for that one. How about inconsistency in process? Wow, pretty spread out. No test automation. Retrospective's not valuable. Okay. Wow, okay. Combination of agile and waterfall. Lack of customer understanding. Wow, okay. So it turns out like most of them are pretty equal. A lot of times the biggest ones are requirements churn and customer understanding. I think I actually plotted it out one time, and it turned out that the biggest ones were agile fall and agile doing and not being. But so we're going to go over ways to prevent these types of failures. So habit number 1 is focus on efficiency and effectiveness. So how do you do that in your testing? What kinds of things do you do specifically to increase your effectiveness and your efficiency? So think about that. So, I think that what we do is test automation. That's one, right? What else do we do in our practices to increase our effectiveness?
Test-driven design.
Test-driven design? Don't everybody raise your hand now. Frequent deliveries? Anything else? Just because I'm a substitute teacher doesn't mean I'm not going to call on you in the back. Okay.
Infrastructure as code.
Say again?
Infrastructure as code.
Infrastructure as code. That, one of the things I like to think about is managing technical debt and risk. So who here actually documents their technical debt and risk? Anybody raise your hand? No? Payson, all right, good. Managing technical debt, I think, is a key one that we often forget. And so what kinds of metrics, you notice that that's green there. What kind of metrics would you use to examine your technical debt? Payson, do you have any answers for that since you're...
Mostly documenting risks.
Okay.
Priorities.
What's that?
Priorities
Priorities? Uh-huh.
of the customer.
Okay.
How important and critical it is.
Right. Good. Anyone else? Defects. Defects are a form of technical debt, right? Anyone else? Code coverage. Good. So there are ways that we can actually measure technical debt and handle it ahead of time in order to increase our effectiveness. Having criteria for documentation, I think, is a really important one. Some folks here, a lot of people think about Agile. They say no documentation, right? But what criteria do you have for documentation? Why should you have it or why should you not have it? Does anybody here have criteria in their workplace for whether or not to have a documentation, or do you just do it because you're supposed to, or you do it because your boss told you to, or you do it because that's the way it's always been done?
But we do it, we have kind of a hybridized system that we do, and the way that we write stories is that we actually, every story is created in the wiki page. The acceptance criteria is put in a row, and we have a little check for it, but also we have a note that we can capture any learning that we do. The idea is that we want to make sure that what we learn doesn't get lost, so the next story we end up having to reinvent the wheel again. So we reference that, we tag it, and we can go back and look at them and say, oh yeah, this story referenced this. This is a precursor to it. We can link it to it, so we can go back and see what happened and go, hey, that's worth knowing. They'll save us some time. So it has proven to be beneficial for us.
Right. Good. Good. Anyone else?
We have documentation standards because 80% of the cost of software is maintenance.
Right. So most developers spend half their time reading code, right? So documentation is very, very important. Of course, a lot of people think Agile means no documentation, but it does mean some. Did you have? Okay. Habit number 2, I call it treat the user as royalty, right? So I think earlier today, a lot of the talks have said to really understand deeply the user, and I'll second that here. What criteria do you have to prioritize what you're doing? And is that related to the user? Did you have a comment?
I was going to remark about the green check.
Okay.
It impacts 5% of our customer base as a critical.
Oh, anything that impacts 5% of your customer, 5% or more, right?
Right.
Well, that's a lot of stuff then. Anyone else? What criteria do you use to determine what you do in terms of priority, and does that involve the user? Does anybody have any good criteria that they use? If you have a list of things to do, how do you prioritize those things?
Crashes go straight to the top.
You go straight to the top, but how do you determine what's at the top?
Crashes go straight to the top.
Crashes go straight to the top, okay. But what else beyond crashes? Maybe you don't have any. What if you didn't have any crashes? Did you have? Frequency? How often it happens? What else? What's that? Risk to data. Okay. Payson? Revenue. That's a good one. So revenue and customers and money, right? That's a real good one. Okay. So I think that it's important to realize that, we don't want to race to the finish line. A lot of times we're going through our sprints and we're trying to get all our points done and so forth. And I think it's important to really think about what those points contain. Because sometimes we're racing and we may be racing to the finish line without actually getting anything done. So habit number 3 is going to take a little bit of time to cover. I'm going to talk about trusting and meaningful retrospectives. A lot of people talk about trust in Agile. Does anybody know how to define trust? How would you define trust?
In fact, Agile is a teamwork.
Okay.
It's it's very important to coordinate with every member of the team in Agile. You trust each other,
Mm-hmm.
define your roles and there.
Right. Okay.
Trust what you're agreeing
Okay.
upon and define the role.
Okay. But what does trust mean? Bertrand?
I define trust as being able to say something to a coworker I respect, something that I know could potentially damage the relationship, but delivered in such a way that you know that your goal in mind is actually improve team efficiency. But you feel safe in the environment doing so.
Okay.
Because you have respect and trust for an individual, and you trust that whatever you say won't be interpreted in a way that may be negative, that person has constructive criticism.
Oh, okay, good. Remember, I did say that I was going to skip over some slides and not read slides, so we're going to skip over this one here. Going to skip over the metrics part. Meaningful retrospective. So I'm going to skip over this. So trust. A lot of people talk about trust, but don't really know what it is. So let's talk about that. Sometimes you think about trust, oh, you're with your friends and you hug each other and say you trust each other, right? But what does trust mean in the workplace? Well, there's four elements of trust. The first one is predictability. The second one is exchange. The third one is reciprocity. And the fourth one is vulnerability. I'm going to talk about each one of these in detail and talk about how it manifests itself in our personal lives as well as in our work lives. So the first one, predictability. You say you're going to meet your friend at 6 o'clock for dinner in a certain restaurant, and they show up. You can predict that they're going to show up. What does that mean? That means that you can schedule something else at 8 o'clock, right? If they're undependable or they don't show up, it's like, shoot, now I got to cancel my plans for 8 o'clock. Got to go move everything around, right? Predictable. That's part of trust. That's one of the first elements of trust. So how does that manifest itself in work? You do what you say you're going to do, when you say you're going to do it, right? Predictability is a big part of trust. Second part of trust is exchange. So you go to a restaurant, you pay $10 for breakfast. It tastes pretty good. You think, oh, okay, the environment was good, it was clean. Okay, I got a good exchange. You feel good about that restaurant, you're going to go back. Now, if they charge you $16 and all you got was a bagel with cream cheese, even though it was pretty good, you probably wouldn't really want to go back. It was not a fair exchange. So how would that come out in the work environment?
If they're taking up your time, there's some value in it, and that you have to trust that coworker who comes to your desk is bringing you something that you want to know.
Okay, so the time versus value provided. That's a good one. Anyone else? All right, let's go on to the third one. Third one is reciprocity. Does anybody have any examples of that, reciprocity? So let's say that you help a friend move over the weekend. And, everybody goes home, goes to work on Monday. And so you don't necessarily expect to get paid for it right then, right? Maybe you loaned your pickup truck or something like that. But maybe what you expect is that there's going to be some reciprocity later if you need some help, maybe. So reciprocity is the same thing as value exchange, except there's the added element of time and unknown what you're going to get back. So if somebody takes advantage of you in that way, then you feel there's a break in trust, right? And the last one is vulnerability. That's when somebody could take advantage of you, and hopefully they don't. Right? So let's say that that I'm at a store and I pay Katie $10 and I made a mistake, and it was only a $5 product that I bought, and I walk away and she says, Phil, you paid me too much money. You paid me too much money. Let me give you your money back. She could have taken advantage of me, but she didn't. Or let's say I walk down the street and I drop $10 on the ground, and somebody finds it and say, hey, you dropped your money, sir. They could have taken advantage of me, but they didn't. Right? So that's vulnerability. And when somebody does that, you turn around and say, wow, that guy's pretty trustworthy. Right? So what kind of examples would you have at work that would generate that kind of element of trust?
We recently had a new manager start, and I lead 2 areas, one
Uh-huh.
of which I've never tested. And recently I told her, I was like, I have no idea how to test this area. And instead of her saying, how could you not know that? She just said, oh, that's interesting. I just assumed you could, but that's totally fine.
Yeah, right.
So I had to reveal something that should have been determined.
Right. Good. Katie, you had an example?
That was my example.
Sorry.
Very much. I think when team members are free to feel comfortable saying things about things that they don't know, or admitting they were wrong, just using the word team.
Oh.
You have to be right every single time.
Yeah. Admitting you're wrong really makes you vulnerable. That's true. Yeah. Do you have one, Jessica?
I do. So the third day after I came back from a vacation in Italy, I had to give a presentation at 4:15. In the middle of it, my mind went blank. So I told the people I was presenting to I was having a jet lag moment and to bear with me for a second.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good one. Anyone else? One more? No? Okay, good. So I think that now when you go back to work, you're going to think about how can we implement and instill more trust in our team, right? How can we work together better? How can we be more dependable and predictable? How can we make it a safer space for people to be vulnerable and admit their mistakes or things like that? So what do these 4 elements have in common? Anybody have an idea on that? Anybody thought about what do these 4 elements of trust have in common? Well, what they have in common is that they help us to reduce uncertainty. Right? We know how somebody's going to behave. Basically. Reducing uncertainty is what trust is all about. So, the next one. Be agile, then do agile. I said earlier one of the elements of failure was doing agile and not being agile. So in the habits I say be agile and then do agile. So what does that mean? Does anybody have any ideas what that really means? You can't do agile until you are agile. Anybody have any thoughts on that? So a lot of us, I've been in stand-ups where people go to the meetings and you go around and they say, yep, everything's normal. Yep. So that's showing up for the stand-up meeting, but that's not necessarily being agile, right? What are we supposed to do in a stand-up meeting?
Share your updates honestly.
Right. That's also part of trust, right? Okay. So in a QA, we think of development on the other side and we're on this side and we just do our thing, right? But to be agile, in a bike race, right, Bill? You have to be really agile. So what does that mean in a bike race when you're agile?
You're constantly adapting to the situation for something the same.
You're constantly adapting to the situation. What else? You're like this and you're really, really alert as to what everybody's doing. You're very alert. You know what people, the guy in front of you, well, he kind of rides a little bit like this. I should stay away from him, right? Or you know where your teammates are.
You know who's real, who you can trust.
Right, you know who's predictable and who's not predictable. Jeremiah?
It's kind of like playing you or your stamina.
Yeah.
Like if you're trailing another biker, you're
Yeah.
then independent.
Right. And so think about that in your work environment. When you're working with people, those that you can depend on to be working with you on something, and maybe some guys just go home when it's time to go home, even though there's stuff needs to get done, right? So I call it the be do have paradigm. And so when we were in high school, maybe at least when I was in high school, we thought that we could get some beer, and that we would go to the beach, and we'd have fun, and we'd have lots of friends around us, right? But what we forgot was that the person that we had to be in order to have those friends, we forgot that we had to be a good guy, a good person. So instead of doing and then having results, we need to think about, okay, what ways do we have to be and then do and then have the results? So I call it the be, do, have paradigm. So a lot of times we end up doing a lot of things thinking that we're going to get the result, but we don't, because we're not who the person is to get those results. So here's the doing, right? These are all doings. Scrum meetings, short iterations, things like that. But you're not going to get the results without the being. And so in the Agile be, do, have, this is all the doing, right? We're doing all these things, having postmortems. Maybe they're non-trustful postmortems, right? We're doing things like having planning meetings. And these are the results we expect to have. We expect to have good software and good quality, but sometimes it just doesn't work. So, and the reason is because we need to be a being part of Agile, and that's being communicative, being trustful, right? Being flexible and willing, taking initiative. Those are beings, not doing, right? You can't, has nothing to do with a stand-up meeting directly.
Bill, I have an example of being. We had a team where we lost about 3 or 4 folks from a sort of layoff. And as we looked around the room after that, we're like, oh my goodness, now we are Agile. Now we have to rely on each other.
Wow.
So it really forced us into being Agile.
So what was changing? What changed in your mind, though?
I think it was, we have to rely on each other. I can't take this down.
Okay.
Those types of things.
Yeah.
Collaborative nature, it cemented the team having to be collaborative. Not that I would recommend you go do that.
Right, lay off half your team.
Agile, but it
Okay.
really impacted us.
Good, great, thanks, Scott. Okay. Right, so how to support being Agile being, you had mentioned just a minute ago, small teams. Small teams force you to work together well. The second point in blue that I like to emphasize is letting the quiet people talk. A lot of times the extroverted people that do all the talking, and then you have introverted people sitting in a meeting and they don't say a whole lot, but those are the people that sometimes have the best ideas. And so I encourage you in your meetings that you have, your planning meetings, your retrospectives and so forth, to really encourage these people to share their thoughts, because sometimes they have the best ideas. At least that's what I've found. Does anybody find that sometimes that people that don't talk a lot have good ideas? They do, really. And so you have to create that trustful, vulnerable environment to get these people that don't talk a lot to share their ideas. And I think it's really important. That's part of being Agile. Big T's won't talk about that. Communication. Yeah, I put this up in my company. We talk about communication a lot. Communication being part of our evolutionary DNA. And the reason I say evolutionary DNA, if you think about animals, think about, say, chimpanzees versus man. If you have a bunch of chimpanzees, 2 men and 2 chimpanzees, if they're of equal strength, just say, and the chimpanzees were just grunting at each other, running around grunting, and Payson and I were saying, okay, well, you go around the back, then I'm going to go over here, you lure them over here like this. The guys that communicate the best are going to be the people that win. Right? Does that make sense? So communication is part of our evolution, and those that communicate the best will win. All other things being equal. So I'm not going to talk about that because we're really working hard on getting this done. Yeah, this is what I call what they call extreme programming. This is extreme testing. These two girls are on our team, and they're testing together, and they decided they wanted to sit together too, like that. And they're actually writing test cases and finding bugs together, sharing what they're doing with each other and things like that. I mean, that's kind of like a extreme version of things. And I always like this picture because we were at a conference, and they were in their hotel room, and I knocked on the door and I said, "What are you guys doing?" I said, "We're working, and they're testing together on something." And I thought, wow, that's really cool. That really is Agile. Let's see.
There's probably only one chair available.
No, there's two chairs. There are two chairs. Yeah, right. Okay. Habit number 5, think tasks, not roles. Anybody do that? I mean, one of the things they talked about earlier today was, who was it? Penny said that, oh, you don't have to be a coder, but it's recommended, basically, right? So in order to take on different tasks, you have to have skills. And so I recommend the same thing, even though your job description may not have programming in it, but it's a good idea to at least understand it, right? In order for you to take on different hats and different tasks on your team. So if you're QA and you're not a programmer, it does help to work with a programmer to understand what they're doing, if you can do a little coding. Let's see. So, everybody says, oh, everybody does everything. Everybody's responsible for quality. But I still think that people should have the roles that they're best at. So Tom Brady is 6'4" and 230 pounds, right? So he could probably play linebacker. He probably could. But he's best at quarterback. And so you guys and your teams need to figure out, how does that work on your team? Everybody can do everything, maybe. Maybe some people can do test automation code. Maybe some people can do documentation. But some people are not necessarily very good at documentation, right? But they can. So think about what people are best for what things, even though they could play linebacker if they had to, right? And get more skills. Sharpen the saw. Tester pairing. I brought this up just a minute ago with my tester girls. I won't talk about this too much. Focus on the customer. I always, in my talk, anybody heard of this saying, help me, help you? Where does this come from? Yeah, this comes from Jerry Maguire. I just love this. I played this movie actually as part of my talk earlier when I gave this talk, and I went, help me, help you, right? So what does that mean in our work? What does that mean in our work?
Get clarification before you code.
Get clarification. What else?
Know what's important.
Know what's important to them, because that helps you help them, right? Yeah.
Work with your Scrum Master to remove impediments.
Right, removing impediments. Anyone else? Right. Good. Yeah, I was going to show this video, and they had to take out, towards the end of the video, who's the football player guy? I forgot his name. Cuba Gooding Jr. He walks out and he's naked, right? And they had to cut that part out, though. But, okay. Help me. I change it around. I say, help you, help me. So I try to help people help me. Let me help you, help me. So let's see here. Last habit, begin with the end in mind, right? And so the thing about Agile is that we talk about this word sustainable. We want to have a sustainable process. So what does that mean? Pacing. Right. Right. You know, have you been in a bike race where you just kind of redlined and you couldn't go anymore, Bill? I'm sure you have, right? Yeah, right, you have to back off. And what happens when you have to back off? You fall off the back of the pack, you're finished for the day, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things in Agile that I think that a lot of people forget about in terms of measuring, we like to measure overtime. We actually measure overtime, and what you'll find is that overtime is directly related to defects. I don't know if they're correlated, Zager. Are they correlated, or is it causation?
That's for you to find out.
Okay. I think there's causation there, but we don't know. We'll have to find out. Yeah. Yeah. So and make sure you have a constant rate of delivery, right? Or a constant rate of work, amount of work, not rate of delivery. Developing a long-term diet. Yeah. Who here has heard that you have to have a habit more than 21 days, right? Everybody knows that one, right? So the same thing with Agile when you're converting to Agile. And a lot of things in Agile make sense, but it's hard to implement. It's hard to not eat sweets, isn't it?
Especially when you serve cookies and fruit.
Especially with the peanut butter cookies, right? So key components of an Agile diet, I think, is having some key metrics. A lot of people hate metrics, but I do believe in some key metrics. So what would be a key metric for Agile? Besides velocity. I know everybody says, oh, velocity. But what else do we have besides velocity? Number of bugs, okay. Anybody else?
Number of features released.
Number of features released? Okay.
Man hours spent.
Man hours spent, good. Okay, so we need some really easy things to collect in Agile for metrics. And so who here weighs themselves pretty periodically? Okay. Right, so you have to, while Zager is eating his cookie.
No, he's
Right. And so why do we use that measurement for a measure of our health?
It's not so much that it's a measure of our health, but it's a daily check-in. By doing that
Okay.
daily check-in, you can
Right.
little measurement changes.
Uh-huh.
It can be very frustrating, and you can get a lot of fluctuation, like 5 to 10 pounds is not unusual. And if you do weigh yourself daily, which I do, it can drive you up the wall. And you can think, I did everything perfectly, I did everything that I needed to do, and I put on 3 pounds, and you want to punch something.
But you didn't talk.
Yeah.
You're not talking about what you ate at
Right,
2 o'clock in the morning. You're not
Exactly.
telling us.
No, what I'm saying is that those are the little things that you do. You think that you are, but when you do that check-in, you have to come to grips with what's really happening.
Right.
I'll phrase it up like this. Your mathematics may be great, but your physics may suck.
Right. So the reason I bring this up is because I think it's important to have a couple, 2 or 3 metrics that really give you an indicator of your health, whether it's an Agile process or your body health. But the second thing that's really important is that it has to be easy. The reason that you do the scale thing is because it's easy. You go like this, and you look down like that, right? It's very easy to do. So developing all these complicated metrics, even though they may be accurate, like going to the doctor and having your blood taken and going and sending it to the lab, that's really accurate, right? But you're not going to do it very often. So what I recommend is for you to find 2 to 3 that work really well for you and stick to those. Let's see, I'm not going to talk too much about this here. Here's a New Year's resolution diet for Agile. How many people here go to the gym on January 2nd? Anyone here? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, I don't think I've told you anything you didn't know. But I do hope that you learned something in terms of being able to take some nuggets home for your practices in Agile. Or I hope that I've reinforced or given you a new angle to think on things, especially with respect to trust. Trust in our homes, trust in our families, and trust at our work. And yes, eating fried foods is not good for you. So, in wrapping up, successfully being agile is not a technique, it's not a technology, right? And you don't have to join Weight Watchers to lose weight, just like you don't have to buy a book to be agile. It's a long-term effort. Don't get discouraged if you get on the scale and you weigh 3 pounds more, right? Actually, sometimes there's a delayed effect, right? Sometimes you may cut down on your intake but not see a result for 2 or 3 days later. Isn't that right? Yep. So, here are the habits summarized for you. And in closing, I'll tell a little story. This is a teacher of mine from high school. And you can see I went back to see him in 2014. And I called him up and I said, Mr. Larson, his name is, I'd really like to come see you and talk to you. And he said, really? I said, oh, he said, okay. So I got and talked to him and I said, the reason I came here is because I wanted to share with you that a lesson that I learned from you that I've carried with me my whole life. And he said, really, what was that? And I said, well, one day in class, towards the end of the class, you gave us some homework. And one of the students raised their hand and says, Mr. Larson, that's not fair. Mr. Greer gave us homework already, and you gave us homework yesterday. And you know how the teachers are up front usually, and they're fiddling around with their papers, usually something like that. And Mr. Larson, he stood up like this. He went like this. He looked and he said, when you were born, did the doctor pick you up and say, life is fair, life is fair, life is fair? He said, no, he didn't. Do your homework. And, after I told Mr. Larson that, he looked at me and he kind of smiled and he said, if that's all you got in all that time in class, he said, that's still pretty darn good, because he said, that's a really important one. And so whenever I have something, I go through something really hard and I get through it, I really think about Mr. Larson, actually, and how, I've overcome something that's not fair, or something, I've just been dealt a bad hand or something, and I think about Mr. Larson. So I hope that, I'll never equal Mr. Larson, but I hope that you got something out of today that you can remember and take home. So thanks very much.